Yes, hello again. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV and welcome to the 2024 Northern Ireland 2-day charity scramble. Yes, thanks for joining me once again. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, and as you can see, we're out and about on our travels once again, and today we've made the journey across the Irish Sea for our annual visit to Cecil Pearsons racetrack at Craigantlet to cover his 2-day charity scramble event. Now, this particular meeting has been going on for 5 years now, and this is the 6th year of its conception, so we're hoping to raise some very valuable funds for local charities in the area, and today's charities are the Leukemia Lymphoma and of course the Northern Ireland Air Ambulance. So hopefully two very worthwhile causes there are going to be receiving some well-earned cash. Now this of course is the Friday, so we'll have our first part of the Scramble 2-day event this evening, and of course after that we will have the usual barbecue and beer, which is always very popular. Now Saturday of course we will have a full programme of races, including the Twin Shock A, B and C classes, and of course some racing from the youth class, and some little autos for the kids thrown in as well. So it's all happening here at Craigantlet over the 2 days. But until we get down to the racing this evening, we're going to take a quick walk through the paddock, and this will be our first of 2 paddock walkabouts for this year's event. So let's head down to the paddock and take a look at some of those very nice bikes that are soon to take part in this 2024 charity scramble event. Okay, we're going to kick off our part 1 paddock walkabout by taking a look at some of the bikes belonging to Tom Paul, and this is his 1967 360 CZ Sidepiper. Now I certainly recognise this bike because I'm pretty sure that this machine here belonged to another Irish racing legend, Trevor Calderwood. And I do remember taking some pictures and video clips of this bike many years ago when Trevor had this bike at a Scottish Classic racing event in Forfar in Scotland. But you don't see too many of these sidepipers still racing these days. Quite a few of these bikes are now just languishing about in private collections and museums, but this bike here of Tom's certainly looks in good original condition, considering this bike's now about 57 years old, but still good to see these old classics taking to the track. And you can see that the gear shifter there on Tom's bikes had the usual CZ upgrade, whereby the long gear shifter has been changed for this linkage type setup, which makes the gearbox change as good, and if not better, than any Japanese bikes. And these remote gear shifter mechanisms are available from Peter Gerard. But of course here's exactly why these bikes get their title, with the side pipe exhaust system that wraps round that cylinder barrel and goes along the right hand side of the bike to this quite long tailpipe silencer at the rear. Now I'm not sure if if these were originally chromed away back in the day, but I suppose they weren't. But it certainly looks nice, all shiny in that chrome finish. But a quite rare and unusual bike to see at a classic scramble these days. But that's the first of Tom's machines, his 1967 360 Sidepiper CZ. Now, it appears that Tom likes to have a few backup bikes because he's brought 4 machines along to this charity scramble here at Craigantlet, and this is his second bike. It looks like an old 1970s RM. I think it's a 400 Suzuki. But I do remember Tom telling me on the day that I took these short video clips of this bike that he told me that this bike here, when he bought it from the seller in Scotland, the seller told him that this bike used to belong to British daredevil stunt rider, the legendary Eddie Kidd. Now, whether that is true, I don't actually know. Now, Eddie never used an RM Suzuki as a stunt bike, but this could certainly have been one of his play bikes, if you like to put it like that. But not a fully original bike, as you can see, but again, a quite rare bike in this twin shock configuration. But I can't remember if I actually asked Tom if this was a 250 or maybe even a 400, but it certainly looks like a 400. It's not got the original shocks on the back, but nevertheless, it's still good to see one of these old RM Suzukis taking part in classic scrambles. Now, this is Tom's other backup machine. I think it's a 1983 RM 400 Suzuki with that single monoshock suspension on the rear, and again, it looks like it's got a pair of those hideous black wheels fitted to the bike, but we'll not go into that particular subject at this time. But these RM Suzuki motors were pretty good for their time. This, of course, is a reed valve version of this Suzuki two-stroke motor. And it certainly looks like it's still got its original front and rear suspension with, of course, Suzuki's superb full floater suspension swing arm there on the back. But another reasonably good looking bike from Tom Paul. Now, this is Tom's final machine. Now, exactly as to why you need 4 bikes at a classic scramble, I'm not entirely sure, but this is his 1978, or it could be even a 1979 250 twin shock Maico. And you can see that Tom's old Maico here has the piston port 250 motor in the chassis, and it looks like the Bing carburetor that used to be fitted to these engines is now long gone, and Tom's replaced it with a more modern Japanese Mikuni. But there's no question these 78 or 79 chassis were pretty good handling bikes, and this looks like it could certainly do a job for Tom on the track. But you know what they say, you've only one backside, so why you need 4 race bikes to take to a race event, I don't know. But a nice collection there of old timers. That's Tom Paul's Suzuki's, his old CZ Sidepiper and his 250 Maico. Right, so next up, another nice Czechoslovakian racer. This is Eddie Murray's 250 CZ twin shocker. Another nice looking old classic. And again, I'm not entirely sure as to the bike's particular year, but it certainly looks like an old 1960s classic. Not original again, but as I said many times before, lots of these old bikes are now not still fitted with their original parts, but this one definitely has its original Jikov Czechoslovakian carburetor. And again, this one's been also doctored with this new remote gear shifter linkage setup. But this is certainly a big worthwhile improvement to fit to these CZ two-stroke machines. And you can see that the fuel tanks on these little CZ two-strokers weren't exactly huge, but they certainly held enough fuel to do at least 2 or 3 race motos. And just in the background there, you can see one of the tractors pulling some more of the transporters into the paddock, because we had a massive monsoon rain shower on the Thursday and absolutely soaked the paddock. So it was pretty wet at this point, but we still managed to make our way around and take a look at some of those nice machines. But there you go, that's Eddie Murray's lovely little 250 Czechoslovakian CZ. But just like Tom Paul with his 4 machines, you can see that Eddie has brought himself a backup bike along as well. And this machine here looks like it could be maybe a 250 or even another 400 RM Suzuki. Another nice old twin shock classic. And when we eventually get around to posting all of the racing footage from this charity event, you can see Eddie racing this old RM Suzuki in the twin shock grade B class. Now, as I said before, it's not very often you see these old RM Suzukis still racing at these kind of events, but it's nice to see that guys are still taking the time to try and keep them running and keep them out there on the track. But this is Eddie's second or maybe even backup bike to his 250 CZ. So that's another nice looking classic from Eddie Murray. Now, if you're into your big thumper 4 strokes, then you may enjoy taking a look at this bike. This is Adrien Lapin's 640cc Rotax Husqvarna. Now, I do remember Adrien telling me that he bought this bike from a vendor or a seller at the Telford show, and Adrien did a deal with that particular seller and part exchanged his CCM for this big 4-stroke Husqvarna with this massive Rotax engine in the chassis. Now, Adrien also told me that he doesn't know too much about this particular bike's construction and who actually put it all together, but as you can see, it's fitted with some nice trick parts with a good pair of these Swedish-made Olin piggyback shocks here on the back of the bike, which I'm sure you already know are top quality parts. And it looks like the bike's also had a custom-made aluminium airbox there as well. Now, this 640 Rotax engine is, of course, a 4-valve motor with that drive belt connecting the crank to the camshaft. But as long as you maintain these big 4-stroke thumpers regularly, there's no question about how reliable these motors are, and they certainly are not short in the horsepower department. Now, here at the front we have a pair of original Husqvarna front forks. These are possibly the same front forks that maybe would have been fitted to the big 510 TC Huskies way back in the day. And the bike also looks like it's got the original Husqvarna hub at the back there, although that gold anodised XL rim is undoubtedly a replacement. But another very good looking 4-stroke thumper, and this is just one of the bikes that Adrien's brought along to this charity Scramble event. This is one of 3 or 4 bikes that Adrien has in his possession. And these are 2 of his other race bikes. The one on the right there is a 430, and the bike on the left is another big 510 or even bigger 4-stroke Husqvarna thumper. But you can see both of these bikes in action on the track when we eventually get around to posting all the racing footage, because I think both of these bikes will be raced in the twin shock grade A class. But a nice 430 CR here. This is another one of the bikes that Adrien put together through his Lapin performance franchise. Adrien sets up and builds bikes for customers and friends of the club, so he's kept very busy when it comes to repairing bikes and building and servicing machines for the club members. And yet again, this is just one of at least 4 bikes that Adrien's brought along to the charity Scramble. And this is his other Husqvarna, another bike that I don't know too much about, but as you can see, it's a big TC thumper 4-stroker, possibly a big 510 or even bigger, but it certainly looks the business, this big 4-banger Husky. And you may remember these big 4-stroke Husqvarnas have that twin-port cylinder head with twin exhausts, one going down either side of the bike, but it looks like Adrien's done a Siamese join up whereby the 2 pipes go in to one single tailpipe at the rear. But a very business looking motorcycle, this big 4-stroker from Adrien Lapin. And Adrien again is the current chairman of the Northern Ireland Classic Scramble Club, so he's kept very busy with all of the organisation of this 2-day charity event. And I often wonder how Adrien manages to fit the time in to even put these bikes on the track, because he always seems to be buzzing around doing everything bar racing his bikes. But again, you'll certainly get a chance to see these bikes here in action on the track when we get around to posting the racing footage from this event. But 3 very nice bikes there belonging to Adrien Lapin. Now, this was another bike that was prepared, I think, by Adrien. This is another nice looking twin shock 2-stroke CZ racer. Another bike that I don't know too much about, but according to the race programme, this bike is going to be ridden by Jamie Johnston during the 2 days of the charity Scramble event. And you can see that this is not your average everyday CZ engine. Looks like it's had some kind of Cerakote coating put on the engine casings. But still a nice looking piece of kit. Once again, not an original Czechoslovakian CZ because it got different shocks, and of course these billet handmade triple clamps as well, which replace the original steel items, but a very nice looking motorcycle that hopefully we'll see racing in the twin shock grade B class. But once again, another fine looking motorcycle, all part of the Adrien Lapin collection. So next up we're going to take a look at John Campbell's 1977 CCM. This is certainly a bike that you don't see at classic scrambles these days, but I do remember in 1977 Alan Clues did receive an order from the Sultan of Oman for 54 of these 1977 bikes, because the Sultan was going to start up his own motorcycle display team. So the Clues CCM boys got an order from the Sultan for 54 of these bikes, which is really another reason why many individuals couldn't actually put their hands on one of these bikes in 1977. And these bikes are certainly one of the rarer CCMs that you very seldom see, even in collections or museums. And it's certainly quite rare to see one still taking part in classic scrambles. But I must say this bike here of John's is quite an original example. There's one or two bits on this bike that of course are not from 77, but most of the bike is from that particular year. And as I said, it's quite a treat to see one of these bikes taking part in one of these classic scramble events. And not only is this old CCM a bit of a looker, it's actually quite quick on the track as well, as you'll soon find out when we eventually get around to posting all of the racing footage from this event. And you can see John racing this bike in the twin shock grade C class. But that bike there is just one of two machines that John's brought along to this year's charity scramble. That's his 1977 CCM, and this next bike that we're going to feature here is his second or backup machine, and this is John's 1974 short stroke CCM 4-stroke racer. And these 1974 models, as you know, are made famous by the great John Banks when he used to race that particular model. And these footrests here are not, of course, the original footrests. These are upgraded footrests made by Harry Stitt, and Harry calls these footrests his bear claws. But you can see John there on the left having a cup of tea and a bite to eat just before the racing commences. So you can see at least John's 1977 bike taking part in the racing footage, and John's hoping that it doesn't have to fall back on his 1974 bike when the racing begins. But that's another couple of nice CCMs from John Campbell. So as we continue our Paddock walkabout, we're now going to take a look at John Kusak's 1979 RM400 Suzuki. Lovely looking machine, and again quite original with most of the parts on it, apart of course from those rear shocks, which I think are a pair of YSS items. But I do remember these RM400s were very quick for their time, and this engine here certainly looks like it's in its original condition. There's one or two different parts being added to the bike just to give it a bit of an upgrade, but I do remember these were very quick machines back in the day. And here at the front end of John's Suzuki, we have, I think, the original forks on this bike, and it looks like he's added that aluminium expansion chamber exhaust guard as well, just to keep stones and other debris from damaging that exhaust. But we still have the old school drum brakes here at the front, and as I said, a replacement pair of YSS piggyback rear shocks on the back of the bike. An alloy swing arm as per 1979, of course, for the RM400, with again the old school drum brake on the rear. And of course it would be only a couple of years down the road when Suzuki would then ditch the old twin shock rear suspension and move on to the liquid cooled engine and their single monoshock rear end, which of course they introduced in 1981. But this is a lovely example of a 1979 RM400, and that's John Kusak's chosen race bike. Now, of course, there were a collection of old Maicos at this year's charity event, and these are Stephen Beattie's pair of 1981 490 Maico twin shockers, and a lovely pair of twin shock classics. And of course, you can see Stephen riding both of these bikes, one at a time at least, but you can see Stephen riding these 490s when he takes to the track in the twin shock grade A class among all of the other fast riders of that twin shock grade A class. But a lovely pair of Maicos, again not original, but none of these old 1981s are original these days because of their age. But you can see some modifications being done on the hubs there, with the cooling ribs or the strengthening ribs machined off, and then the alloy simply polished up. And this particular bike here has an alloy swing arm as opposed to what would have been the original tubular steel swing arm, and a nice pair of Öhlins piggyback rear shocks on the bike as well. But this is a pretty quick piece of machinery, this 490 of Stephen Beattie's. So, and this one also has the more desirable reed valve engine in it, as opposed to the earlier piston port engine. But a nice pair of 81 Maicos there from Stephen Beattie. So next up, it's another couple of nice Maicos, and both of these bikes here belong to James Brown. And these are James's JB Maicos. And that number 339 bike there will be ridden by Stuart McClurg in the twin shock grade A class. So look forward to Stuart on that old Maico, because he is pretty quick. But as I said, both of these bikes owned and prepared by James Brown. And as far as I know, James doesn't actually ride the bikes himself, but he does most of the preparation work and supplies the bikes for Stuart McClurg to race at these kind of classic race events. And another pair of nice YSS piggyback shocks on the back of this 81 490 Maico, and I'm not sure what year this old devil is here. I think it's a 1974, maybe even a 75 old machine, but another nice old classic there. I'm looking forward to seeing this bike performing on the track. And as I said, this will be the first of two walks that we'll be taking around the paddock at this year's charity scramble in Northern Ireland, and most of these bikes here in this part one are some of the bikes from the Friday evening's race event. And this particular 1981 490 Maico is done up in a kind of blue and white livery. And nowadays you can get these Maicos in basically whatever kind of colour takes your fancy, but we're still looking forward to seeing Stuart McClurg racing both of these bikes when we get round to watching the racing. But that's another lovely pair of old classics, owned, as I said, and prepped by James Brown. So as I continued my walk around the paddock, this was another nice classic that I came across. This is Paul Donaghy's 1974 250 Honda Elsinore. Remember the old Elsies from back in the 1970s, an iconic motorcycle. This, of course, was always said to be Honda's first ever purpose-built motocross machine. All of the bikes that Honda built prior to this were basically just re-modified road bikes at that time, but these Elsies were said to be Honda's first ever real motocross machine, which again was powered by this iconic Honda two-stroke engine. And again, this was just one of two bikes that Paul brought along to this charity scramble event. And this is his other race machine, a 1980 250 Maico, quite similar to the bike that I used to race myself way back in the day, although my bike was a 440 1980 machine. But these 250s are still very good bikes. They make excellent club racers bikes, and again you can see that ignition cover has been replaced, a nice alloy CNC machine cover there to replace what would have been the original plastic, but another lovely 1980 250 Maico there from Paul Donaghy. So it certainly appeared that at least most of the riders attending this event for the two-day charity scramble had at least one backup machine. Now this was another little belter that I came across. This is Eddie Long's 1981 YZ490 Yamaha. Yet another of those iconic 490s, an absolute rocket ship of an engine in these big YZs. And I do remember Eddie telling me that he more or less bought this bike as it is in these pictures, and although he's not a big fan of those black wheels, he said he's certainly not going to change them just for the sake of having a better pair of maybe gold or polished alloy rims. But apart from that, this is still quite a decent looking bike, and as you know, super quick on the racetrack. And you can see Eddie racing this bike in the twin shock grade B class, but of course this bike isn't a twin shock machine, it's a monoshock rear end on this YZ, but these bikes are still eligible to race alongside the twin shock bikes at virtue of the fact that this bike still has drum brakes on the front and at the rear. Of course it has an air-cooled engine, and most importantly it has non-linkage suspension at the rear. And then you can see Eddie in the background there just prepping his second or backup race bike, his old twin shock Maico. But despite those black wheels, it's still another tidy looking piece of kit. That's Eddie Long's 1981 YZ 490. So this is the second or backup bike that Eddie is going to be using over the course of the 2 days. This is his 1978, or it could be a 79 400 Maico. And again, as I remember, these old Maicos were good handling bikes, especially these 78s or 79s. And if you couldn't lay your hands on the iconic Mega 281 490, then these 78 or 79 Maicos do make an excellent alternative. But another nice bike there from Eddie Long, that's his 400 Maico. So this was another nice bike that I came across on my travels. This is Darrin Dunlop's 1983 Mugen Honda 250, a super rare machine, and you certainly don't see many of these Mugen Hondas taking part in race events these days. But basically these Mugens are competition upgrades for your Honda dirt bikes, which I think originally was started away back in 1973 when Mugen was set up to make upgraded engine parts for the Honda racing cars of the time. And it was, I think, a few years later in 1976 when they began making competition parts for these Honda motocross bikes. But as I said, a very rare sight to see one of these Mugen Hondas at a classic Scramble event. And here at the front end of the bike, we've got quite a substantial pair of Swedish Öhlins upside down suspension units. And I'm not sure if these are the originals from that 1983 year, but they certainly look the job on this big Evolution motocrosser. Still, of course, drum brakes on the front of this bike with that, of course, Honda's Pro Link alloy box section swing arm, which, as I remember, was quite a good suspension system for the early 1980s. So you can expect this bike here to be super quick on the track when we eventually get racing. But as I said, it's quite a rare sight to see a 250 Mugen Honda at one of these old school classic race events. Right, just to wrap up this part one of our Paddock walkabout at this year's 2024 Charity Scramble, we're going to take a look at Peter Gilliland's Royal Enfield Classic. And straight away you can see that this is one of those proper old school types of classic scramblers, although I'm certainly no expert on these British built four strokes, but I'm pretty sure that all of you Enfield aficionados out there will know just exactly what you're looking at here. But it does look to me like it could possibly be maybe even a 350 engine, because it does look like the same motor that they fitted into the Enfield Bullet road bikes way back in the 1960s. But I can tell you that the gearbox is a 5-speed, thanks of course to that little nameplate there stamped on the side of the gearbox. Now, other parts of the engine, as I said, I know absolutely nothing about, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by making guesses, but it's certainly a big lump of a motor, and quite typical of the kind of engines that were fitted into these old scramblers way back in the 1960s. And you can see that Peter's bike has all of the hallmarks of the old school scramblers from the 1960s with those front and rear alloy mudguards, that alloy fuel tank, and of course the alloy number plate side panels as well, which of course these old scramblers did have way back in the day. But another nice classic to finish this part one off, that's Peter Gilliland's Royal Enfield Racer. And of course we do have plenty more classics coming up for you in part 2 of our Paddock walkabout at this year's 2-day charity scramble in Northern Ireland. So make sure that you rejoin me or even subscribe to CDB TV in order that you don't miss out on the next episode. And these are just a few of the bikes that we will be featuring when we return with that part 2 Paddock walkabout. But for the time being, thanks for watching, and it's goodbye for now.